Good evening, ghoulies and ghosties and long-leggedy beasties. This is Alex coming at you from the underworld, and welcome back to another episode of This weekend. I'm continuing forward with my extensive TBR, and I'm knocking out the 1980s splatterpunk novel Ghoul by Michael Slade. Now, before I get started, I would like to note that although this slasher classic is out of print, you can find a reasonably priced copy on sites like eBay or thrift books. And even though this is the sequel to Headhunter, you don't have to read Headhunter first to understand this one. However, there are Easter eggs throughout Ghoul in regards to its predecessor, but in my opinion, those Easter eggs aren't crucial. Also, while an entire cast of new characters are featured in this work, the plot does continue forward with the Special X Force. Also, I would like to note that I buddy read this work with my good online friends Hanny and Nisa, which we collectively felt like although this book was good, it wasn't as good as Headhunter. Nonetheless, we still had a good time discussing its themes, characters, and scenes. So if any of y'all are watching, I appreciate that you read this with me, and I hope you enjoy this review. Anywho, with that said, let's gear up in our best leather-studded jacket and go headbang at the late-night Ghoul concert, where we're bound to have a bloody good time with sex, death, and rock and roll. Ghoul by Michael Slade introduces a group of teenage boys known as the Ghouls, where they have gathered in the desolate New England countryside to initiate a young boy named Saxton Hyde, which, in order for Saxton to become an official member of Ghoul, he must endure being temporarily buried alive, with the understanding that this is to be an act that demonstrates trust amongst himself and those in the group. Then, upon him being placed in a crate and buried, at first things don't seem to be that bad. However, eventually claustrophobia and panic kick in, which quickly this results in him suffering from a psychological break. From here, we fast forward to nearly 15 years later, where the plot introduces Detective Chief Superintendent Hilary Rand of Scotland Yard, along with her team known as the Murder Squad. Following their introduction, it's revealed Rand is trying to stop three killers currently at large, who have been dubbed as the Vampire Killer, the Sewer Killer, and Jack the Bomber, which, among those causing bloodshed, their MOs are entirely different, such as while the Vampire Killer has been draining blood from prepubescent girls, the Sewer Killer attacks anyone he can get his hands on, and Jack the Bomber has targeted the LGBTQ+ community. But even though each maniac has completely different methods and motives, they have more in common than what Detective Rand realizes. Determined to stop these criminals at large before they can harm anyone else, Rand gathers up the best of the best to tie up loose ends, which among those is Special X team member Chandler Zink, Investigator Bill Carden, and Investigator Ken Benz. Then, as the plot continues to thicken, these investigators find themselves drawn into a twisted web of drug abuse, snuff films, and a wealthy family full of dark secrets. Eventually, as their investigations continue, a shock rock metal band called Ghoul becomes the prime suspects in a string of homicides that have terrorized London. Ghoul was published in 1987, 3 years after its groundbreaking predecessor, Headhunter. Among the many subjects that inspired this sequel, on Slade's website, it's revealed that in the 1950s, psychiatrist Dr. Frederick Wertham had theorized that comic books were a harmful form of entertainment. Due to his staunch belief and his published book, Seduction of the Innocent, a U.S. congressional inquiry went into effect which determined that horror comics cause juvenile delinquency. Aside from commenting on that, Slade drew inspiration from movies and books that entertained him throughout his childhood. These subjects included the movie adaptation of Psycho and classic literature such as Robert Louis Stevenson's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, as well as H.P. Lovecraft and Edgar Allan Poe's 10 Great Mysteries. Other sources of inspiration came about following Slade's high school education, where his mother took him to London. While here, he explored the murder sites of Jack the Ripper, and eventually, due to having the right strings pulled, he visited the Black Museum, which is known for its displays of the yard's most famous crime cases. Upon this particular visit, Slade was influenced by seeing gallstones that didn't dissolve in an acid bath, which it was these very stones that had sent George Hyde, aka the vampire killer, to the gallows. Also, he had seen the infamous letter that gave Jack the Ripper his iconic name, as well as a pair of binoculars that could shoot daggers into the eyes of whoever used them. Years later, in 1971, as Slade finished law school, Alice Cooper had taken the stage, which, after Slade saw Cooper's performance, he got the idea for a novel about a rocker who goes insane. Even still, this story would yet to manifest until the 1980s, which during this time, while Slade traveled about to promote Headhunter, he took a few side trips so he could gain more detail and inspiration for Ghoul. And while in London, the Thames River inspired him to create the subterranean domain of the sewer killer. Upon his American book tour, he visited Providence to explore Lovecraft's stomping grounds. While there, he plotted out Ghoul in St. John's churchyard where Poe and Lovecraft once had sat. Fun facts! Here's a few things you might not know about Michael Slade. While the name Michael Slade is a pseudonym, J. Clark is the driving force behind the multiple authors who make up this name. Jay co-authored Ghoul with his wife Lee Clark and John Banks. Unfortunately, there isn't much backstory on Lee Clark or John Banks. On March 7th, 2025, Slade announced on his Facebook page that he was working on a reimagining of Ghoul, similar to how he reimagined Headhunter. Now that we have that covered, it's time to move on to the spoiler segment, which, if you haven't read this book before, I'm about to reveal some things that could ruin the experience for you. So if you would like to click away, just scroll down to the comments, and you'll see that I have a pinned comment at the top with the timestamp in it. Once you click that timestamp, it will direct you away from the spoilers and bring you to the thoughts section. Now, you only have 17 seconds to do this, so ready, set, go! Since everybody's had the opportunity to click away, I'd like to talk about a few of my favorite moments. First up is Saxton's psychotic break. Now, prior to this, the book states it's the early 70s, and a group of boys known as the Ghouls have explained to Saxton that their initiation method is all about trust, and if he wants to become a ghoul, he has to trust them and vice versa. Then they explain part of what makes a ghoul special is coming back from the grave, as the act is supposed to represent rebirth. So, with this in mind, they have Saxton dig his own grave next to a colonial cemetery. And once he's done, they bury him in a crate with a pipe sticking out, which will allow him the opportunity to breathe while he's underground. Once he's in place, the ghouls leave him be, and while they're out grabbing a Coke, Saxton realizes the space he's in is so confined that he can't even bring his hand to his ear to scratch. Which, it's upon this realization that he panics, and eventually he hears a chaotic utterance that chants Cthulhu Fhtagn. Then, to make matters worse, he starts to hear movement from within the nearby graves, which causes him to imagine these maggoty skeletons crawling through the soil towards him. At this point, panic sets in, and he tries to bust free from the crate. However, while he attempts freedom, he imagines worms crawling all inside him, and as he busts his head against the crate's lid, he hears a voice that tells him not to do that because we'll bleed to death. Finally, upon him screaming, it's revealed Saxton has potentially changed for the worst. In my opinion, this was a really kick-ass opening, because I instantly knew that we had just gained an origin story on a serial killer in the making, which, personally, this felt like a great throwback to the slasher movies of yesteryear, such as the opening of something like Terror Train or Blood Rage or Pieces. But the main reasons why I really loved this moment was because it provided everything I could have hoped for in an opening. Like, aside from the origin story of how Saxton lost his mind, I enjoyed the nod to a burial that reminded me of Edgar Allan Poe, and at the same time while this was happening, it worked in the Cthulhu mythos. Meanwhile, as this was all unfolding, it maintained this kick-ass gothic punk vibe. Not to mention the intensity factor that came after Saxton was buried alive was pretty damn strong, which, coming from someone who is claustrophobic, I felt like all of this combined for an unforgettable opening. Next up is Mohawk's mutilation. Now, before this happens, the book has introduced multiple characters, and among those we have Detective Hilary Rand, who is trying to put an end to the murders that are sweeping London, which, due to these crimes being so very different, she suspects there are three unrelated murderers at large. Meanwhile, Detective Zink is hot on the trail of a man named Ray Hingler, who is a porn producer, a drug lord, the head of a biker gang, and he's the manager of a shock rock band called Ghoul. So, as Zink is zoning in on Hingler being the prime suspect, a hitman named Sid comes into play. And to carry out the wishes of Hingler, Sid lures a biker known as Mohawk out to an industrial side of town where Sid shoots him in the head. However, the bloodshed doesn't end there, because after that, Sid drags Mohawk's dead body into the plant where he castrates the corpse. Then, upon deciding to keep the genitals as a trophy, he beheads the corpse, pulls out its eyes, and puts them alongside the genitals, which causes it to look like this really screwed up version of Mr. Potato Head. And at some point, Sid disembowels the body and throws all of its remains into an industrial grinder that makes food for pets. And last, he skins Mohawk's head, puts all of his trophies inside the skull, then after cleanup, he goes on about his merry little way. Y'all, I wish I had something profound to say here, but no, I really don't, because this was honestly nothing more than a scene that quenched my bloodthirst. Which, after having read this, I really admired the level of gore and perversity that it presented, and it made me think that with Slade being this bold with his description, splatterpunk authors of the 80s really did set the table for modern splatterpunk and extreme horror. So, despite all of the long-winded scenes of computer technology and historic descriptions, moments like this were one of the reasons why I continued to read. My final favorite moment was when we received the full picture of the Ghoul's lair. So, surrounding this, Hingler was arrested. Zink continued to investigate Ghoul, where two of its members, known as Erica Zan and Axel Crypt, had become murder suspects. Meanwhile, Detective Rand figured out that the vampire killer and Jack the Bomber were the same person, and it's revealed that the guy who had taken on the Axel character's persona in Ghoul was actually a changeling for Saxton. And while he had filled that role, Rika, who is Saxton's twin sister, had been covering for her brother being absent. During this time, it's established Rika and Saxton have a half-sister named Deborah, who had been stalked by Sid, and since their childhood, the three siblings had been the black sheep of a wealthy family, where the family fortune had been inherited by another half-sister named Rosanna. which, as the plot continues to thicken, it comes to light that due to having a split personality, Saxton isn't only the vampire killer and Jack the Bomber, but he's also Sid and the sewer killer. Furthermore, each of these homicidal personalities are reflections of the traumas that he suffered as a young child. For example, the vampire killer, also known as Elaine Tease, took blood because Saxton had a fear of having hemophilia. Jack the Bomber committed homophobic crimes as a result of the sexual abuse Saxton had suffered as a child. The sewer killer came through as a reflection of Saxton's trauma of being buried alive, and Sid was his personification of anger. So, with all of that in mind, Deborah and Zink went to London to try to solve the case. And upon attending one of Ghoul's shows, they later follow Rika to a graveyard that leads them into a wax museum. Meanwhile, Saxton is freaking out because Hillary isn't on his altar like how he had planned, and he believes he needs someone as a blood sacrifice for Cthulhu. Following this, Zink and Deborah have been separated and Zink has been drugged. Nonetheless, he continues to Saxton's hideout. Once there, he sees that Deborah has been tied up and Rika has been restrained to the sacrificial altar as an offering, which, to make matters worse, Saxton has burned away Rika's eyeballs and chiseled out her teeth. Furthermore, it's revealed that in Saxton's hideout, there's an Iron Maiden propped open with someone dying slowly on its spikes. Also, there's a crucified woman with an axe in her head, which above her are Polaroids of Saxton having sex with her corpse, and beneath her remains, Saxton has placed her dead baby in an office water cooler. Also, there are dead strippers sewn together where their male and female anatomy has been combined, and there's Detective Hohn's severed head hanging from the ceiling with his teeth sharpened and his tongue used as a tie. Other than those horrors, there are eyes suspended in see-through boxes that belong to humans and animals, as well as bones fixed as a wind chime to make sound above a skinned body. Now, other than all of the dead bodies, a blood-red light is seen pulsing from a nearby well, which Saxton believes are the elder gods coming forward. Shortly thereafter, Saxton cuts off Rika's face and wears it as a mask. Then he throws Deborah down the well, which, upon her landing at the base, she's attacked by a Siamese twin that Saxton had kept in a cage. Meanwhile, Zink and Saxton have a pretty kick-ass fight where Saxton is injured on the Iron Maiden, which allows Zink to save the day. So, everything about this reveal was pretty gruesome, which, needless to say, I enjoyed. And due to how this scene never let up, it felt absolutely relentless in its ability to stun the reader. Not to mention, because of how Saxton had utilized the dead bodies, this felt like the author was giving a nod to Ed Gein, who I considered to be one of the most interesting serial killers. But overall, what really stood out to me was the fact that although we had this pretty decent body count throughout the book, we were somewhat spared the gory detail. And when this reveal came, it truly delivered and felt like a well-needed overload, which I think had we seen what Saxton had done with the remains of each of his victims right away, this moment wouldn't have been as shocking or as intense. I would like to take this opportunity to bitch. Normally, I reserve this moment for just one or two assholes. However, the whole family belonging to the twins was on an entirely different level of batshit crazy. As a matter of fact, they were so insane, they made the Kardashians look positively normal, which is something that I thought could never be possible, but you know what? Here we are. Like, you have siblings banging siblings, twincest, a daughter who bangs her father and throws orgies for her classmates. Not to mention, one of the twins isn't just a homicidal maniac, but he has multiple maniacs living inside him. Then we have one of the twins' half siblings named Deborah, and for a hot minute there, I thought she was going to be that hidden gem that shines through. But when she started giving Fatal Attraction vibes towards Zinc, I was like, yep, she is just as nutty as a shithouse squirrel. And from there, things got so insane, I thought, damn. Rich people really are that screwed up. Which, I mean, makes total sense because look at Elon Musk. While Ghoul is a splatterpunk whodunit, it also presents supernatural elements that harken back to Lovecraft and Poe. Meanwhile, it provides constant nods to classic horror movies and comics. Other than that, the book presented a whole new cast compared to the characters of its predecessor, which I had mixed feelings about. And as far as themes were concerned, this book covered quite a few subjects, some of which includes domestic abuse, the effects of horror and shock rock entertainment, homophobia and the AIDS epidemic, as well as dissociative identity disorder. Character wise, I'm just gonna throw this out there. Zinc was hot. Like, the man had sex appeal, and the authors damn well knew it. But as far as the other protagonists are concerned, I feel like Detective Rand and Dr. Braithwaite were a wasted opportunity. Which I say this because early on it's established about the sexism and racism that's going on at Scotland Yard. And while this is presented, Rand and Braithwaite step into the scene with a strong presence, which indicated to me that they were going to be lead characters and they were going to overcome these conflicts and catch the bad guy. However, as the novel progressed, it quickly became obvious that Rand and Braithwaite were nothing more than background characters, which this was a letdown because I felt like their vibes were worth more than just the page time they were given. As far as the antagonists are concerned, I felt like we were given characters who were literally bottom of the barrel scum of the earth. And while none of them were the same with their intentions, methods, or motives, they were all equally depraved, and they did make things interesting. However, among all of them, and this is just me trying to avoid spoilers, but the least interesting antagonist was Jack the Bomber. And this wasn't due to his homophobia. It just felt like he was the least creative. And I really just did not care about the descriptions of his delusions as they really felt unnecessary. Theme-wise, domestic abuse is a huge part of this book, which obviously this is primarily seen through the lead antagonist as it shows how some victims can grow into victimizers. For example, this is seen with the childhood of the Ghoul character and how his toxic upbringing molded him into the person he became. Then another example of domestic abuse is seen throughout by how incest was common with Ghoul's family, which this not only included incest between father and daughter, but it included siblings, which also included twincest. And due to the twisted nature of what the antagonist went through and encouraged at such a young age, the plot suggests that for these types, things can only get worse unless something is done to stop their toxic behavior and get them the therapy that they need. Next up, this book tackles the effects that heavy metal music and horror-themed entertainment has on its consumers. And while it seems like it was common that people blamed entertainment for crime during the 70s and 80s, I remember that type of blame continued to exist well into the 90s. But as a reflection of the times, at one point, this subject receives a lengthy discussion between Zinc and his partner, which during their conversation, I feel like the authors did a decent job by not entirely blaming entertainment for crime. Also, I appreciate how these characters explored the possibilities of what would happen if a mentally unstable person consumed darker entertainment. Now, while I firmly believe entertainment doesn't create violence, as it can serve as a reflection of the world around us, I won't deny that there have been circumstances in our reality where unstable persons misinterpreted art or twisted it to justify their crimes, which, to give a few examples, we have where Charles Manson believed Helter Skelter by the Beatles predicted a race war, whereas Mark David Chapman's obsession with Catcher in the Rye made him believe John Lennon should be assassinated. But before I move on, although the authors didn't seem to demonize entertainment, they did a good job capitalizing on the fears of that time, which, in regards to Ghoul, Alice Cooper and H.P. Lovecraft seem to be the subjects that come into play. Another theme this book presents is homophobia. And again, this is me skating around spoilers, but this is primarily seen by how Jack the Bomber had been sexually assaulted by a stepfather during childhood. Then, in turn, as an adult, Jack categorized all gay men as the same and went on a mass murder rampage against the gay community. Aside from that, since this book takes place in the 80s, the AIDS epidemic also comes into play, which, in this regards, one scene brings to light the struggles and hardships that gay men experienced after testing positive. And because of how these men were depicted with their struggles, it provides a glimpse into the times and how scared and alone they truly felt. Another big focus of this book is dissociative identity disorder. And again, unfortunately, I can't go much into this due to spoilers, but as seen before and since, this work totally presents the trope of multiple personality disorder, where it's portrayed in a far-fetched manner. And even though this twist has been done before, this book did present a fresh angle on the age-old subject. Overall, Ghoul didn't scare me, creep me out, or gross me out. However, there were quite a few moments that were entertaining in regards to its kills. Although Ghoul by Michael Slade is primarily a whodunit, its conclusion didn't hit as hard as its predecessor. Which, I say this because Headhunter was a book that left me with my jaw dropped after I came to its grand reveal. And in that regards, I feel like Ghoul missed the mark, as the twist really wasn't that big of a surprise or really that shocking. Also, while I enjoy the overall effect of reading Slade's work with its unforgettable characters and creative kills, Slade can sometimes go on tangents about setting and technology that simply feel unnecessary. And with that in mind, I'll be generous and say if this book were perhaps maybe 20 to 30 pages less, it could have been more impactful. However, I understand Slade likes to mix genres between thriller, horror, and supernatural, and since I'm really not that well read in thriller suspense, perhaps the unnecessary detail is a formula that's deliberately used to build suspense until perhaps the next clue or twist hits. Anywho, while it may seem that I really didn't care for this book with my criticisms, at the end of the day, I did enjoy the overall effect. So if you're looking for a vintage splatterpunk slasher to read, I do feel like January is the perfect time to enjoy Ghoul. Well, now that we're at the end of this episode, I would just like to say sorry it's taken me so long to do this review, but I honestly just decided to take a break. Like, as many of you know, I ended up quitting a very toxic job, and I now have a job that I absolutely love. I enjoy the people I work with, I like what I do, and when I come home from work, I actually still have brain cells left. So, yeah, I'm very thrilled about that. And as I had mentioned in a few other videos, I had a birthday, so I took time for that. We ended up having to get our floor fixed, so there was time for that. And last weekend, I went to visit relatives in New Orleans and absolutely had a blast. But with that said, I do have a few other book reviews that I'm working on, so expect more reviews sooner than later. Also, if you would like to hunt me down on social media, links are available in the description section of this video, as well as links where you can contribute to my Patreon account or become a member of this channel. But since I have nothing else left to blab about, I would just like to say I hope everyone has a great week. Thank you for watching, and sweet nightmares.